been a while since I've been here. So thank you, Chairman Perry, Ranking Member Coleman, other distinguished members of the panel for enabling me to testify here today. Since I left Congress, I've had the opportunity to work with the Investigative Project on Terrorism. This has been a leading organization studying the threat of radical Islam for over 20 years. It has always been at the forefront. I'd like to submit my testimony for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, there's just a couple of points that I'd like to highlight as we go through the testimony. I'd like to that I think are important. Number one, the trend lines in the war have not been going in the right direction. You know, recently the University of Maryland completed a study that showed that back in 2001, roughly 2,500 people per year were losing their lives as a result of radical jihadist terrorist activities. In 2007, 2008, 2009, that number had gone from roughly 2,500, I think we have a chart to show that, had gone from roughly 2,500 to about 3,000, 3,300 in that time frame. So it was a significant increase, but not dramatic. But then take a look at the line, what happens after 2008 to 2015, and what we're projecting for 2016. That number has increased from roughly, slightly over 3,000 people per year to approaching 30,000 people per year losing their lives globally as a result of radical jihadism. The second slide that I'll use that will be up there shows what the spread of radical jihadism has been, the global expansion. 2001, you could look at the globe and it'd be a number of different places. 2009, 2010, it was kind of concentrated in the Middle East. But the threat that we see evolving and where we see the threat today is we see it obviously in the Middle East. We see it in Northern Africa. It is now spreading into Asia. And we also see what is happening in Europe, and obviously the United States is at risk. So the numbers in the trend line are clearly heading in the wrong direction. The geographic spread of the threat from radical jihadism is going in the wrong direction. This is a war that we are not winning today. We are not containing it, we are not confronting it, and we are not defeating it. The key question I think that Congress needs to ask is, what has happened potentially to create this dramatic increase since 2008. From 2001 to 2008, 2009, it stayed relatively contained, but since that time, we have seen it escalate significantly. We now have 5 failed states that are havens for radical jihadists: Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, and Afghanistan. So this is places where these organizations can plan, they can train, and they can prepare to launch attacks against the West, against America, and other places in the Middle East. I really encourage the committee to take a very, very hard look, an in-depth dive on what is called PSD 11. Presidential Study Directive 11. This came out of, it's still classified, but there's been a lot written about this document in the media, so it has been leaked to various people. But what PSD 11 does is it fundamentally changed America's approach toward the Muslim world. For 40 years, on a bipartisan basis, Republican and Democratic administrations had said our goal in the Middle East was stability and security. 2010, 2011 timeframe, the President and his administration said that policy they were going to take a look at it. David Ignatius, in one of the columns that he wrote back then, indicated that the White House, a White House official said, "We're rolling the dice." Well, it didn't turn out very well, because the strategy now said we were going to engage with elements of reform. Well, that ended up being organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood and other radical jihadist groups. We did not choose wisely. In Egypt, we facilitated the overthrow of Mubarak, someone who I met with, many American officials had met with. This was an individual in a country that for years did everything that we asked them to do to maintain stability and fight radical jihadists in that part of the world. We facilitated and participated in the overthrow of Gaddafi. Again, Gaddafi reformed in 2003, 2004, someone who had been our enemy, but because of consistent Republican and Democrat administrations putting sanctions on him and holding his feet to the fire in 2004, he changed sides. He got rid of his nuclear weapons program. He paid reparations, and he started to fight radical jihadists with us. And we took an island of stability in northern Africa, and it became a hotbed of extremism, exporting weapons, exporting fighters and ideology throughout northern Africa, the Middle East, and being a launching pad into Europe. In closing, let me just say that I think it's time for Congress to ask this administration some very serious questions about PSD-11. Exactly what is the content of PSD-11? What were the criteria for vetting organizations in Libya, Iraq, Egypt, Syria, and Afghanistan, and Yemen? What were the criteria for vetting organizations that we would work with? What groups and individuals actually passed through the vetting process and we started to engage with? The names and the organizations of the individuals responsible for vetting the new groups, and any and all assessments by the U.S. government of the activities undertaken by these groups from 2012 from 2012 until today. And I think that you will find that the change in policy is the primary reason for the instability and the radical spread, or the rapid spread of radical jihadism throughout the Middle East and the increased threat to the homeland. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
You're already familiar with PSD-11, which, as a matter of fact, you made me aware of it. With that, does that affect domestic policy, which then potentially affects the increase in these killings? And how would you characterize that, if there is one, effect on the policy here at home and abroad? And what signs, if there are any, that we can see that indicate the effect of that? For instance, what many of us in Congress and around the country feel is an unwillingness by the administration to identify the enemy. Is that enrobed potentially in that policy? Are we too close to it, and too is the administration wedded to that policy so closely that now, for sake of embarrassment or for the considerations of the dramatic failures in North Africa and the Middle East, that they just don't want to talk about it, and so we can't say radical Islam or Islamists or those type of things? And I would be interested in hearing your thoughts.
All right, let me address this. The second part of your question first is, what has been the impact of implementing a policy directive like PSD-11 domestically? The impact domestically is that there are numerous examples which we've identified at the Investigative Project on Terrorism. I actually have a book coming out next month because the evidence is so extensive, so deep, and so broad about the different types of people that have now been coming into the United States under visas to visit. The meetings that have been going on with these individuals and policymakers at state and at the White House is frightening. There's example after example after example of individuals who have embraced Hamas, who have embraced suicide bombers, issued fatwas against and the death penalty against members of the LGBT community, who in prior administrations would never have been granted access into the United States. They would never have gotten a visa. The State Department and Homeland Security would have taken a look at their background, their public statements, and their actions and said, no, they're not getting into the United States. This administration has not only welcomed them into the United States, has welcomed them into the policy arms of the U.S. federal government. So that is how it's domestically expanded domestically. These individuals then frequently will travel around the United States speaking at a number of the organizations that Zuhdi has identified, and they will also participate in fundraising and espousing the same messages of hate that they have given overseas and doing the same thing here in the United States. Internationally, as I said, yes, it is absolutely important to identify the enemy, and we have. All right? What has happened with the Obama administration is that they have narrowed the definition of who the enemy is by embracing with individuals that the Clinton administration, the Bush administration always would have identified as being part of the problem and and identifying them as the enemy. The biggest example is the Muslim Brotherhood. Under PSD 11, and this is why I think it's absolutely critical that you get the information of who was vetted, how they were vetted, and who we actually started to engage with. But engaging with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and in Libya, two countries that were strong allies in fighting radical jihadists. Okay? We facilitated or actively participated in their overthrow. And we almost lost Egypt, all right? But thankfully, the forces that be in the country came back and we stopped the Muslim Brotherhood regime in Egypt after 1 year. We did lose Libya. And so why do you see this escalation in the number of people who are victims? Because we lost Northern Africa. The weapons caches. We lost intelligence. I mean, I was chairman of the Intelligence Committee. We met with Gaddafi and his intelligence individuals. They were providing us with insights into the threat from radical jihadism, not only in Libya, but throughout Northern Africa and parts of the Middle East. Gaddafi was good at gathering intelligence of these bad folks because they threatened his regime. After 2004, he shared that information with us extensively and cooperated with us. After 2011, that all went dark. In Egypt, cooperation with their intelligence has gone largely dark after 2011 because they no longer believe that they can trust us. In Iraq, we have gone dark. So in a lot of these different areas where we used to get valuable intelligence, great participation, insights into the threat, those countries have now become failed states, and they are havens for preparing, planning, and executing attacks against the United States.